When we moved into this apartment, one small thing didn't line up. Not enough to worry about, just enough to notice. On the third day, he found another chair in the kitchen. I didn't remember the moment it appeared. The building was old, but there were no visible problems. The stairwell was clean. The neighbors said hello. The elevator didn't always work, but the stairs were easy enough. Our floor was quiet. There were 3 of us who moved in. Me, my wife, and our son, Noah. He was 6. He adjusted quickly. He had a habit of immediately finding a place in any apartment where he felt comfortable. On the very first day, he chose the corner by the window in his room. He put his box of toy cars there, and that settled it. The apartment had 2 rooms, a small kitchen, a long hallway that led to the rooms, and the bathroom. At the end of the hallway was a storage closet with a narrow door. The previous owners had kept jars and old bags in there. We left some of their shelves because it was convenient. The first days were simple. Unpacking, shopping, the smell of paint in one room. Noah walked around the apartment barefoot. He opened cabinet doors, looked inside. He didn't ask permission, and I didn't stop him because there wasn't anything dangerous. We had bought a kitchen table and 2 chairs. One for me, one for my wife. Noah usually ate in his small child's chair that we'd brought from the old place. I didn't remember a third chair. It stood by the wall, as if it had always been there. A plain wooden chair with a dark back. There was a thin cushion on the seat. I thought it must have been left behind by the previous owners. We probably just hadn't noticed it during the viewing. That happens. My wife said she didn't like the chair. Not because of how it looked. It just felt out of place, like it didn't belong. She suggested putting it in the storage closet or giving it away. Noah heard this and said that we couldn't. He said it calmly, not like a request and not like a tantrum, just like a fact. I asked why we couldn't. He answered, "It's Grandma's." I said, "Which grandma?" He looked at me and shrugged, as if the question didn't make sense. My wife said, "You mean Grandma Helen?" "Which grandma?" Noah said, "No, just Grandma. She's here." It sounded strange, but kids sometimes talk as if everything is simple. I didn't push it. We decided to leave the chair for now, until we sorted out everything else. That evening, Noah cleared some space by the table and moved Grandma's chair closer to the edge. I asked what he was doing. He said, "It has to be the right way." That night, I woke up to a short sound from the kitchen, like a cup touching the table. I got up, walked down the hallway. The apartment was dark, but the nightlight we kept for Noah was on in the hall. The kitchen was quiet. The chair stood by the table. There was a cup on the table. Our cups were different. This one was white, without any pattern, a bit thicker. I picked it up. It was warm. Not hot, but warm, like after tea. I looked at the kettle. It was off. The stove, too. I checked the water in the kettle. It wasn't cold. I didn't wake my wife. I put the cup in the sink and went back to bed. In the morning, Noah saw the cup in the sink and said, "You shouldn't do that. She washes it herself." I said, "Who is she?" He answered, "Grandma." My wife said the cup must have been left by the previous owners, and that the water could have been warm because of the pipes. I agreed. It sounded reasonable. Back then, I still thought that everything had an explanation. On the 4th day, Noah asked us to leave the hallway light on at night. I said we could, but asked why. He answered, "If it's dark, she stands." I asked again, "Who stands?" He looked at me like I was asking something unnecessary again, and said, "Grandma. She doesn't like the hallway dark." I didn't feel like arguing. The hallway light was dim. I said it was fine. That night, the hallway light stayed on. Closer to morning, I heard a soft rustling in the kitchen again, like fabric when someone sits down. Then a short sound, like a spoon touching a cup. Then silence. In the morning, there was a cup on the table. Next to it, a small cookie on a saucer. We didn't have that kind of cookie. My wife said Noah must have found it in the storage closet. Noah said, "It's for Grandma." I didn't touch it. I threw the cookie away. I washed the cup and put it in the cabinet with ours. In the evening, Noah took it out and put it on the table. I asked how he knew which cup was the right one. He answered, "She shows it herself." After a week, we already had a certain order. The chair stayed in the kitchen. We didn't move it, except Noah. The cup lived in the cabinet, but in the evening it would end up on the table. A saucer would appear next to it. Sometimes something small, a cookie, a slice of apple, a piece of candy. My wife and I asked at first. Then we started talking less. It became one of those small habits, like closing the balcony door, like turning off the gas. Another rule appeared when my wife decided to rearrange the kitchen. She wanted to move the table closer to the window. She shifted it a few inches. Noah came in, looked, and said, "You can't. She won't get through." He traced a line with his hand from the hallway into the kitchen, straight through the spot where the table now stood. He traced it very precisely, as if he'd walked it himself. My wife said it was nonsense, but she moved the table back. When friends came over for a housewarming, Noah set everything the same way. Grandma's chair stood slightly at an angle, as if someone was meant to sit there and immediately see the hallway. Our friends joked about an extra seat. Noah didn't laugh. He ate and from time to time looked toward the hallway. I didn't feel like arguing. The hallway light was dim. I said it was fine. That night, the hallway light stayed on. Closer to morning, I heard a soft rustling in the kitchen again, like fabric when someone sits down. Then a short sound, like a spoon touching a cup. Then silence. In the morning, there was a cup on the table. Next to it, a small cookie on a saucer. We didn't have that kind of cookie. My wife said Noah must have found it in the storage closet. Noah said, "It's for Grandma." I didn't touch it. I threw the cookie away. I washed the cup and put it in the cabinet with ours. In the evening, Noah took it out and put it on the table. I asked how he knew which cup was the right one. He answered, "She shows it herself." After a week, we already had a certain order. The chair stayed in the kitchen. We didn't move it, except Noah. The cup lived in the cabinet, but in the evening it would end up on the table. A saucer would appear next to it. Sometimes something small, a cookie, a slice of apple, a piece of candy. My wife and I asked at first. Then we started talking less. It became one of those small habits, like closing the balcony door, like turning off the gas. Another rule appeared when my wife decided to rearrange the kitchen. She wanted to move the table closer to the window. She shifted it a few inches. Noah came in, looked, and said, "You can't. She won't get through." He traced a line with his hand from the hallway into the kitchen, straight through the spot where the table now stood. He traced it very precisely, as if he'd walked it himself. My wife said it was nonsense, but she moved the table back. When friends came over for a housewarming, Noah set everything the same way. Grandma's chair stood slightly at an angle, as if someone was meant to sit there and immediately see the hallway. Our friends joked about an extra seat. Noah didn't laugh. He ate and from time to time looked toward the hallway. That night, after the guests left, I heard someone moving the chair in the kitchen, slowly, without a squeak, as if the legs were wrapped in fabric. I got up and went to the hallway. The nightlight was on. In its light, I could see the kitchen doorway, but not the whole kitchen. I could hear only the faint sound of dishes. Then silence. I didn't go in. Not because something stopped me. There just wasn't a need. I stood there and went back to bed. In the morning, the chair stood straight. There was a cup on the table. Clean. Noah sat down for breakfast and said, "She doesn't like it when it's noisy. She just waits." My wife asked, "Waits for what?" Noah answered, "Until it's quiet. Then she does what she needs to do." After that, my wife stopped asking direct questions. I talked less too. Noah didn't explain. He just knew the rules and followed them. Over time, the rules became more precise. The storage closet door couldn't be closed at night. It had to stay slightly ajar. Bags couldn't be left there, even for a moment. Shoes had to be pushed against the wall or put away. Noah followed all of this without reminders. If I left something in the wrong place, he would silently move it before I noticed. Once I asked him, "Noah, why do you do this?" He answered, "Because it's right. She doesn't go around." I asked, "What happens if it's not like that?" He thought for a moment and said, "Then she stands. That's all. Then it takes longer." We started doing things right away so we wouldn't have to fix them later. It was easier. And over time, I noticed that I myself was already looking at the hallway when I put things down. Not like a check, just like a habit. One day, Noah brought an old blanket out of the storage closet. Dark, plaid, a bit heavy. He spread it over Grandma's chair. I said the blanket was dirty and needed to be washed. Noah answered, "No, it's hers." My wife wanted to take the blanket, but Noah just held it with both hands and looked at her without offense. Just waiting. My wife let go and said, "Okay, let it be." The blanket stayed. It lay over the back of the chair, like in a home where someone always sits in the same place. After that, another item appeared, a small glass salt shaker with a metal lid. On the kitchen shelf, between our jars of grains. I didn't remember us buying it. Neither did my wife. We moved the shaker closer to the edge. Noah shifted it so it stood closer to Grandma's place. I asked, "Is this for her too?" He answered, "She puts it that way." Time passed. I noticed small changes in the apartment that none of us had made. A towel hung differently. The cup was already on the table even though Noah was still asleep. The chair moved a couple of inches. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was like several people living in the same home, each with their own habits. I tried a few times to track exactly when it happened. I stayed up later, listened, but at some point I would just fall asleep. And in the morning, I'd see the result. My wife said it was because of fatigue, that the brain fills in details. I agreed. And even if it wasn't, living with it wasn't hard. It didn't interfere with work, with cooking, with raising a child. It was like another family role that had taken its place without any formal introduction. Noah sometimes talked about Grandma as if it were obvious. "She doesn't eat meat," he said once, when my wife put a piece of sausage on the saucer. "Okay, then we won't," she answered, and replaced it with an apple. Another time, I wanted to turn off the hallway night light. Noah said, "Not tonight. She's tired." I asked, "Why do you think that?" He said, "She sat for a long time." "Did you see her?" "No. I just know." One evening, I came home from work early. Grandma's chair wasn't by the table. It was a little out in the hallway, positioned so that it almost blocked the passage. I asked my wife if she had moved it. She said no. My wife came over and wanted to push it back, but Noah came out of his room and said, "Don't touch it." He said it quietly, but clearly. I asked Noah why. He looked at the hallway, then at the storage closet door, left ajar as usual, and said, "She's here right now." We went into the kitchen and sat down. The chair stayed in the hallway. We walked around it. It was like that for about 20 minutes. Nothing happened. Then Noah came over, took the chair, and put it back by the table. Straight. I asked, "Is it done?" He said, "Yes." That evening, We didn't talk about it. We just made dinner, washed the dishes, put Noah to bed, then went to bed ourselves. I lay there thinking that in a normal situation, I would be looking for explanations, checking locks, cameras, neighbors, but I didn't do any of that. I realized that I had already gotten used to the idea that there was someone else in the apartment, not as a stranger, but as part of the home. At some point, Noah started saying, "Our grandma. Don't leave the cup in the sink. Our grandma doesn't like it. Don't put the drying rack in the hallway. Our grandma won't get through." Once I said, "Noah, do you remember her?" He thought and answered, "No, she just is." One weekend, we went to visit my mother. At my mom's place, Noah behaved normally. But in the evening, he asked where Grandma would sit. My mom didn't understand. She laughed and said that they didn't have our grandma there. Noah didn't argue. He went into the hallway, looked at the dark corner by the closet, and said, "She can't be here. It's too narrow." I didn't want to explain anything to my mom. I just said to Noah, "There are different rules here." He looked at me and nodded, as if he understood. But that night, he woke up several times and went into the hallway, stood there for a minute, then came back. In the morning, when we were getting ready to go home, he said, "It's good we're leaving. She's waiting." When we came back to the apartment, the night light in the hallway was on, even though we were sure we'd turned it off. I stood in the doorway and looked at the light. My wife stopped too. Noah went in first. He immediately rearranged our shoes so they were neatly against the wall. Then he went into the kitchen. There was a cup on the table. Next to it, a saucer. On the saucer lay a cookie we hadn't bought. Grandma's chair stood by the table, slightly at an angle. Noah straightened the blanket on the back, sat down in his chair, and said, "That's it. Now it's normal." After that, we talked about it out loud even less. It felt like if everything was done right, nothing needed explaining, and that explanations wouldn't change the rules anyway. A few months passed. Noah started school. We had new small problems: uniforms, textbooks, morning routines. Fatigue became normal. Grandma's rules didn't disappear. They ran alongside everything else. Sometimes Noah would come home from school and say, "She was earlier today." I'd ask, "Why do you think that?" "The chair is straight. That means she's already been." Or, "The blanket is folded differently." I started noticing these details too. My wife started making more soup, and I noticed that sometimes she put another small plate next to the cup. Empty. I asked why. She said, "It's easier that way." Once, in the stairwell, a neighbor from downstairs stopped us. She asked how we were settling in, and then, as if casually, said, "So you have a grandma living with you now?" I said, "No, it's just us." The neighbor looked at me and smiled, briefly, and said, "Well, okay. The main thing is that it's quiet." I didn't tell my wife about it right away, but in the evening, I did. My wife was silent, then said, "Maybe she just mixed us up with someone else." I said, "Maybe." Noah was sitting nearby, drawing. He looked up and said, "She didn't mix it up. She just knows." After that, I understood. Our acceptance hadn't been a decision. It had happened on its own. We hadn't agreed on anything. At some point, the question just became unnecessary. Then there was another change. Noah stopped putting the cup on the table himself. One evening, the cup was already there. Noah was doing homework. My wife was in the bathroom. I was sure none of us had put it there. I asked Noah, "Did you put the cup there?" He answered, "No." "Then who did?" "She did. Now she does it herself." Over time, this happened more often. The cup could be there even before dinner. The saucer too. Sometimes there was a napkin next to it. Thin, paper, folded neatly. My wife started keeping a pack of simple napkins in a drawer. She said it was cleaner that way, but I saw that she bought the same ones that had appeared before. White, without patterns. Gradually, we stopped touching Grandma's place altogether. We wiped the table, but went around the cup. If the blanket was on the chair, we didn't touch it. Once, I accidentally broke a rule. I came home late and left my bag in the hallway. I just put it on the floor and went to wash my hands. Noah came out, looked at the bag, and silently moved it into the kitchen. I said, "I would have moved it myself." He answered, "It has to be right away." That night, I woke up and saw that the hallway night light was off. I clearly remembered that it had been on. I felt for the switch. The night light didn't turn on. I thought it had broken. I found a spare one, put it in. It lit up. I went back to bed. In the morning, Noah asked, "Did you change it?" I said yes. "Why?" He answered, "Because you left the bag. She turns it off when she can't get through. She doesn't like seeing that." I checked the old night light during the day. It worked. It just hadn't worked at night. I didn't draw any conclusions. I just left the spare one. In our second year in that apartment, we renovated Noah's room. During the process, we temporarily put boxes in the hallway. Noah silently carried them aside, into the kitchen or a room, without irritation, just like work. One evening, the workers stayed late, and we had dinner late. Noah fell asleep on the couch. My wife washed dishes. I sat in the kitchen and looked down the hallway. Grandma's chair was in place. The blanket lay as usual. The cup stood on the table. I suddenly thought that I barely remembered how it was before this. Before the chair. Before the cup. Before the rule about the light. I remembered the move, the boxes, the first night. But I could no longer imagine the kitchen without that place. And then I did something I hadn't done before. I quietly said, not addressing anyone in particular, "Good evening." I didn't wait for anything to happen. I wasn't checking. I wasn't listening. I understood that I no longer needed to know why things were this way. The need for explanations had already left without me noticing when. I wasn't afraid either. I hadn't been for a long time. And I knew, very simply, that our family no longer consisted of only the three of us. Nothing dramatic had changed. Nothing had been decided. It was just how things were now. Nothing changed. There were no sounds. No movement. Just the kitchen. I sat there and added, "We were a bit noisy today." "Sorry." My wife looked at me from the sink. She didn't say anything. Just turned back to the dishes. Later, when everyone was asleep, I woke up to a very soft sound, like a cup being placed on the table, but not sharply. Very carefully. Then there was another sound, like the light movement of a blanket over wood. And silence. In the morning, the cup stood a little differently. Before, the handle had been turned toward the hallway. Now it was turned toward the window. Noah came into the kitchen, looked, and said, "She heard." After that, we had another rule, which Noah never said out loud, but which we followed. In the evening, when the kitchen was already clean, one of us would place the cup and saucer the way they had been last. Not the way it was convenient for us, but the way it needed to be. If the handle was toward the window, that's how we left it. A few more months passed. One day, my wife said she'd been offered a job in another area. We'd have to move, because the commute would be too long. We started looking at apartments. Noah listened and barely commented. At one viewing he said, "It won't work here." At another, he said, "This one works. There's space." In the end, we found an apartment that worked. A newer building. A longer hallway. We moved 2 months later. On the first evening, Noah placed the chair by the table so the hallway was visible from it. He laid the blanket over the back. He put the cup and saucer on the table and turned on the small hallway light. My wife put the kettle on the stove. No one said anything. That night, I heard a quiet sound in the kitchen. I didn't get up. The hallway light was on, not bright, just enough to see the outlines. In the morning, the chair stood straight. The cup was on the table. The space worked. In the morning, the cup stood a little differently. The handle was turned toward the hallway. I saw it and didn't fix anything. If stories like this feel familiar, there will be more here.